Did you know that in 1590, an entire English colony vanished without a trace, and the only clue they left behind was a single word carved into a tree? 115 men, women, and children. Gone, no bodies. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just empty houses that had been carefully dismantled. And one cryptic message, CROATOAN. When the governor returned after 3 years away, he found his wife, his daughter, and his newborn granddaughter. The first English child ever born in America had disappeared into the wilderness. This is the story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, America's oldest unsolved mystery. And more than 4 centuries later, we still don't know what happened to them. May 8, 1587, England. 115 colonists boarded ships bound for the New World. Among them, families, craftsmen, farmers, people willing to risk everything for a chance at a new life in America. This wasn't England's first attempt at colonization in the region. Sir Walter Raleigh had sponsored 2 previous expeditions to Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. Both had failed. The first, in 1585, lasted barely a year before the colonists gave up and sailed home. Relations with the local Native American tribes had been hostile, supplies had run low, and the dream of English America seemed impossible. But Raleigh wasn't ready to give up. The third expedition would be different. This time he sent families, women and children included, people who would be committed to staying, to building something permanent. Leading them was John White, an artist and explorer who had been part of the 1585 expedition. White knew the dangers. He'd seen Roanoke before, but he also had a personal stake in this mission. His daughter was among the colonists. Eleanor White Dare, 24 years old, boarded the ship with her husband Ananias Dare, a London bricklayer. Eleanor was pregnant. Their child would be born in the New World if they survived the journey. The voyage took 10 weeks. The colonists were crammed aboard ships not much larger than school buses, enduring storms, seasickness, and uncertainty. But somehow, miraculously, all 115 of them survived. On July 22, 1587, they arrived at Roanoke Island. The plan had been to establish their colony in Chesapeake Bay, farther north, but the ship's pilot, Simon Fernandez, refused to take them any farther. Some historians believe Fernandez was part of a conspiracy to sabotage the mission, but we'll never know for certain. The colonists found themselves on Roanoke Island, at the site of the abandoned 1585 settlement. The old fort was still there, but the houses were gone. No sign of the previous colonists remained. They would have to start from scratch. Less than a month after arriving, on August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare went into labor. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, and because she was the first child born to English parents in Virginia. Virginia Dare, the first English baby born in the Americas. Her birth was cause for celebration. To the struggling colonists, it represented hope, proof that new life was possible in this strange land, that they could build a future here. 6 days later, on August 24th, baby Virginia was baptized. She was the second person ever christened in the Virginia territory, the first being Montejo, a Native American who had traveled to England with earlier expeditions and converted to Christianity. But the celebration was short-lived. The colony was struggling. Supplies were running dangerously low. Relations with local tribes, particularly the Roanoke and CROATOAN people, were tense, sometimes hostile. The colonists were English farmers and craftsmen, not wilderness survivors. They didn't know how to hunt the local game, which plants were safe to eat, or how to survive the coming winter. They needed help, and quickly. On August 27th, just 9 days after his granddaughter's birth, John White made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The colonists asked him to return to England to request supplies and reinforcements. White was reluctant. He didn't want to leave his daughter and newborn granddaughter, but he was the governor. He had connections in England. He was the only one who could secure what they needed, so he went. As his ship sailed away from Roanoke Island, John White looked back at the settlement, at the place where his family was building a new life. He would never see them again. White arrived in England in November 1587, just as the nation was preparing for war. Spain, England's greatest rival, was assembling the Spanish Armada, a massive invasion fleet intended to conquer England and restore Catholic rule. Queen Elizabeth, I needed every available ship for defense. No vessels could be spared for a rescue mission to some remote colony in America. White was desperate. His family was stranded thousands of miles away, but there was nothing he could do. The Spanish Armada attacked in 1588. England, against all odds, defeated the invasion. But the war dragged on, months turned into years. White couldn't secure passage back to Roanoke, can you imagine? Knowing your daughter and infant granddaughter are struggling to survive in the wilderness, and being unable to reach them. Watching months turn into years, wondering if they're still alive. Finally, in 1590, nearly 3 years after he'd left, White managed to arrange passage on a privateering expedition. The ships would be raiding Spanish outposts in the Caribbean, but they agreed to make a detour to Roanoke Island. It wasn't ideal. It was late in the hurricane season. The captains were more interested in plundering Spanish gold than rescuing colonists. But it was White's only chance. On August 15, 1590, White's ship approached the Outer Banks of North Carolina. August 18th would be Virginia Dare's 3rd birthday. White was coming home, finally. But as the ship drew closer to Roanoke Island, he saw smoke rising from the forest. Was it a signal? A sign that the colonists were still there, or something else entirely? On August 18th, 1590, exactly 3 years after Virginia Dare's birth, John White and a small party landed on Roanoke Island. They fired their weapons into the air and sounded a trumpet, hoping to alert the colonists. They shouted, they called out names, nothing, just silence. They followed the smoke and found it was just a forest fire, probably started by lightning, not a signal after all. As they approached the settlement site, they saw something strange. A tall palisade fence had been built around the area, creating a fortification that hadn't existed when White left. On one of the posts, carved in fair capital letters, was a single word, CROATOAN. White's heart must have leapt. Before he'd left in 1587, he'd told the colonists that if they relocated, they should carve their destination into a tree. And if they were in distress, they should include a Maltese cross as a warning. CROATOAN. No cross. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, now called Hatteras Island, about 60 miles south. It was also the name of a Native American tribe, led by Monteo's family. Monteo, the baptized convert who had traveled to England, who had helped the colonists. If the settlers had gone to CROATOAN, they were probably safe. They'd gone willingly to live with friendly natives. White entered the settlement. The houses had been taken down, carefully dismantled, not destroyed. The colonists had clearly left in an orderly fashion, not in panic. But 3 of White's trunks, containing his belongings, his maps, his artwork, had been dug up and looted. His precious watercolor paintings of the New World ruined by rain. The small cannons that should have been at the landing were gone. So were the boats. Everything suggested the colonists had relocated somewhere. But where? White was desperate to reach CROATOAN Island, to follow the only clue he had, to find his family. But then the weather turned. A storm was approaching. The ship's anchor cable snapped, leaving them with only one working anchor. The captain refused to risk the ship. They couldn't search CROATOAN, not now. Not with hurricane season bearing down on them. The crew offered White a compromise. They'd winter in the Caribbean and return to search in the spring of 1591. But fate had other plans. The ship was blown off course, forced to stop in the Azores for supplies. Then the winds prevented them from landing there. Finally, with provisions running low and the crew near mutiny, the captain turned back for England. They arrived on October 24th, 1590. John White never returned to Roanoke. He spent the rest of his life trying to organize rescue expeditions, but none succeeded. He died sometime around 1593, never knowing what happened to his daughter, his granddaughter, or any of the 115 colonists. Virginia Dare was 3 years old when her grandfather last saw the evidence of the colony's departure. If she survived, she would have grown up in a world completely different from the one her parents had planned. But did she survive? What happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke? For more than 400 years, historians, archaeologists, and amateur investigators have tried to solve the mystery. The theories are numerous and none of them are fully satisfying. Theory 1. They joined the CROATOAN tribe. This is the most widely accepted theory. The colonists, struggling to survive, relocated to CROATOAN Island, where Monteo's people offered them refuge. They assimilated into the tribe, intermarrying and adopting Native American customs. Evidence supporting this? In 1701, over a century later, English explorer John Lawson visited Hatteras Island and encountered Native Americans with gray eyes who claimed some of their ancestors were white. They told stories of people who could speak out of a book, meaning they could read. Archaeological digs on Hatteras Island have uncovered 16th century English artifacts in Native American villages, signet rings, gun parts, European pottery. Recent DNA studies have suggested some modern Hatteras descendants may have European ancestry dating to the late 1500s. But here's what doesn't add up. If the colonists simply moved to CROATOAN, why didn't they leave more detailed messages for white? Why not specify exactly where they were going? And why did later Jamestown colonists searching in the early 1600s find no trace of them? Theory 2. They were killed. Some historians believe the colonists were massacred, either by hostile Native American tribes or by Spanish soldiers marching north from Florida. Chief Powhatan of the Powhatan Confederacy later told Jamestown colonists that he'd ordered the destruction of a group of English settlers who'd moved inland. Was he talking about the Roanoke colonists? But again, there's a problem. White found no bodies, no bones, no signs of struggle. The settlement had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed in violence. Theory 3. They split up. Perhaps the colonists didn't all go to one place. Maybe they split into groups, with some heading to CROATOAN, others moving inland toward Chesapeake Bay. In 2012, researchers analyzing John White's original maps discovered hidden markings, symbols covered by patches of paper, that suggested White knew of 2 other locations where colonists might have relocated. Archaeological digs at these sites have found European artifacts dating to the right period. Maybe 50 colonists went to CROATOAN. Another group traveled to the Chowan River. A third group moved to Chesapeake Bay. It would explain why the trail went cold, why no one ever found them. It would mean they scattered, absorbed into different tribes, lost to history in pieces rather than all at once. Today, Fort Raleigh National Historic Site marks the location where the colony once stood. Visitors can walk the grounds, see reconstructions of the earthworks, and ponder the mystery that's captivated Americans for over 4 centuries. Virginia Dare has become an icon. Her name appears on coins, stamps, wine labels, and countless books. She's been the subject of poems, plays, and novels. Some depict her as a tragic figure. Others imagine her growing up among the CROATOAN, living a full life as part of 2 worlds. But the truth is, we know almost nothing about her actual fate. We know she was born on August 18, 1587. We know she was baptized 6 days later. We know her grandfather loved her enough to cross an ocean trying to find her. Beyond that silence, the Lost Colony remains America's oldest unsolved mystery. Despite centuries of investigation, despite modern technology, despite DNA analysis and archaeological digs, we still can't say with certainty what happened to those 115 people. Maybe they assimilated peacefully into Native American communities, their English identities fading over generations until nothing recognizable remained. Maybe they were killed in conflicts we'll never know about, their bones scattered and lost to time. Maybe they died of disease or starvation, leaving no trace. Or maybe, and this is the most haunting possibility, they survived for years, decades even, building new lives in a new world, only to have their stories erased by the passage of time and the priorities of history. Because here's what we often forget. The colonists weren't trying to be mysterious. They weren't trying to disappear into legend. They were just people, families, children, craftspeople, trying to build a future. They carved CROATOAN into that post because they were following instructions. They were leaving a message for John White. They expected him to come back. They expected to be found, but they weren't. And now, more than 400 years later, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, exists more as a symbol than a person. A mystery more than a life. Somewhere in North Carolina, beneath centuries of soil and vegetation, there might be answers. Maybe a grave with English artifacts. Maybe ruins of a relocated settlement. Maybe DNA in the descendants of families who never knew their ancestors crossed an ocean. Or maybe there's nothing left to find. Maybe the lost colony is lost forever. Not because they disappeared mysteriously, but because history simply moved on without them. Because the people who might have told their story, the CROATOAN, the CROATAN, the English who came after, had their own priorities, their own struggles, their own reasons not to preserve the memory of 115 people who vanished into America. John White died never knowing what happened to his family, and 4 centuries later, neither do we. The only certainty is this. On a warm summer day in 1587, a baby girl was born on a barrier island off the coast of North Carolina. She was loved, she was hoped for. She was the future of English America, and then she was gone.